Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Born to Talk with Callanthea. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about managing your emotional triggers. Okay, we all have them. I'd be very surprised if you didn't have them. And I think that this is a crucial topic that if we can overcome and manage our emotional triggers in a better, healthier way, then we can live a healthier, happier life. Okay. Um, and essentially, when I've previously tried to work on my emotional triggers, I came across this book that I find is absolutely phenomenal. Okay. It's really life changing. And it's a book called The Untethered Soul, and it's written by Michael Singer. So today's episode is going to be based around some of the points and the work that he's kind of done and that he mentions in his book, because I just think it's so relatable and so helpful. So in this episode, what I'll do is obviously just explain a little bit about what he writes about in his book, and then we'll have a look at a few points more closely in detail with some analogies that he gives. And then, of course, I'll provide some of my own examples. So, an area where I improved on and an area where I didn't improve on. And obviously, hopefully, by the end, you'll start reflecting on some of your triggers. And what I'll do, I'll give you some sort of key takeaways or key steps that I find useful when I want to overcome my emotional triggers. Okay. So, in Michael Singer's book, he talks about so many amazing things. Okay, he talks about how we have loads of thoughts and how that they kind of control our lives, and that actually we're not our thoughts. Just like we're not actually our emotions. And again, he talks about the sort of emotional triggers and how we can sort of recognize them and want to pull them out of us, so to speak, right? He gives this analogy of removing your inner thorn. And I just want to say that this book is a book that I've read through probably twice, maybe three times. But it's a book that I just pick up every now and then and just turn to a page and I'm like, wow, wisdom. And just literally hits me. And I'm like, that's exactly what I needed to hear today. So it's that relatable. It kind of talks about our relationship, not just with ourselves, but with other people as well, and gives some really sort of interesting like examples of dialogue that we might have with ourselves or with other people. So I find it incredibly useful. But the two things that I'm just going to focus on in today's episode is the point where he talks about or writes about discussing the need to close. So essentially, what he's trying to say there, or what he writes about, is that when we have an emotional trigger, the first sort of like instinctual response is that we close our hearts up, right? That we kind of, our energy just kind of closes around us. And it's almost like a protective mechanism. And just have a reflect on this now. Do you think that this is something you've experienced before? Because when I read this, instantly I was like, I know exactly what that feels like. And specifically, relationships can bring up quite a lot of sort of issues, or you might feel like you need to close around them. So for example, you're with someone and then they're flirting with someone else, right? Nobody likes that. And you might feel that sort of like jealousy or insecurity rising. And then the next minute, your heart's completely shut down, you're closed off, you're unable to speak to them properly or connect with them in a happy way because you're suffering that pain. So, we've all probably experienced an element of that where we are closing due to a trigger. So it's really interesting because when I read that, I think, right, I know that I've experienced that before. I don't experience as much of those in my life now, but I have done, especially in my 20s, just that sort of tendency to close. And basically it talks about how if you can focus on, improving yourself and release your sort of emotional trigger, then you can focus on opening your heart up, right? And not closing. Because the second we close our hearts, we're shut off from the world around us and we don't feel good in that space, okay? And we're not able to connect with other people. So it's not really a life that we would consciously choose to live. But at the same time, it's almost like a program that's operating subconsciously where we just instinctually just think, right, we need to close now, we need to protect ourselves. But it's not actually helping us. We're not actually in a life threatening situation. Okay, we're in a situation that might need some communication, but at the end of the day, all we have is this feeling, and we think that feeling is something to really fear and worry about, when actually it's just a feeling. And it basically talks about how we're not our feelings, but of course we are experiencing them. So if we can kind of distinguish between that, then we can obviously make waves in managing our emotional triggers. And that brings me on to the part in the book where he talks about removing your inner thorn. And I found this chapter so enlightening, absolutely brilliant. So, just to kind of summarize a little bit about what he's talking about with removing your inner thorn, it's essentially a metaphor, right? A metaphor for your emotions. So, he says that if you have a thorn stuck in your arm, you have two choices. You can leave it there, but something on the outside might touch it and hurt you more, or you can pull it out. For the majority of us, we will choose to actually keep that thorn in there, even though it defies all logic, right? Because when we think about the actual thorn, we're like, of course you want to pull it out. But we don't do that with our emotions. And, it's kind of worrying to think how many thorns, metaphorically speaking, that we have like trapped in our body that we've not been able to remove. Maybe we've not wanted to remove them, right? Maybe we just don't know how. I know that I've had so many thorns, and we all get them from childhood. And then obviously, your relationships with other people, how you feel about yourself, just any situation. Okay, there's just so many situations where we can have inner thorns. And if something has disturbed us and made us feel uncomfortable, made us feel fear, worry, anxiety, anything like that, then we are going to probably keep that within us if we don't deal with it there and then. And then, unfortunately, what happens if we do keep those thorns within us? Every day becomes a battle to not have our thorns touched, right? To not feel that same pain that we've experienced before, whether it's anger, heartache, insecurity, fear. And that just makes us really vulnerable. We just simply can't protect ourselves because someone will do something that upsets us because we're allowing it to upset us, right? And then, you might have one bad thing happen in a day where your trigger was touched. And then it ruins the whole day, or you assume it ruins the whole day when it doesn't have to be that way, because that day might have been absolutely amazing. There was just that one thing that upset you. But if you could work on that one thing that is upsetting you, learn to release it, learn to deal with it better, and hopefully completely let go of it, so that if that situation arises again, you don't respond in the same way, it doesn't hurt you emotionally, then think how empowering that would be. So these are the thoughts that I was having when I was reading this chapter. And there's probably loads of examples that I could give about removing inner thorns. Even just thinking about, when I'm driving, if there's someone who cuts me up or is quite dangerous on the road, reckless on the road, it can really annoy me to the point that I do get road rage. It is something that I do experience. And people that have travelled in the car with me will absolutely attest to that. Especially if I don't know where I'm going and I'm having to deal with idiots on the road, right? And it's something that triggers me, but all it does is put me in a stressful state when I could be in a more calmer state and then just get home and feel fine. But instead, I end up building up all of that stress, and then I struggle to let it go. So I realised that this was something that was occurring on a regular basis. And I just thought, why am I letting this get to me? As long as I've not, got in an accident, as long as I'm okay, of course there are idiots on the road, but if I can choose to just sort of learn to feel that emotion when it's happening and consciously make that choice to let it go and not react, basically observe my emotions, right, from an objective point of view, then I can begin to overcome this. So it's something that I absolutely have worked on really well and successfully in the past. But sometimes what happens is if I get into the car and I don't think about those situations and I don't set the intention, then I can fall back into my old ways, and then I have to correct myself again and go, no, it's fine, just let it go. But, so this is the thing, it's a work in progress. Some thorns, you might be able to remove once and they'll never come back again. Others, you need to keep on pulling it out and pulling it out because it's really stubborn and it's stuck right in there. So that's just, one example. Another example is obviously relationships. I'm someone who, kind of holds my partner to a higher standard than everyone else. And maybe you're someone who does the same. But I think a lot of mine does come from the need to be sort of respected and not have someone walking all over me, whether it's viewing how maybe my mum was treated and things like that. But I want better for myself. So I won't settle for someone who is disrespectful and someone who doesn't care, which sounds completely logical when I say it like that, but some people are a lot more relaxed in relationships, like, oh, I don't like it when he does that, but it's fine, he can just do what he wants. And I want to make sure that I am being fair and reasonable, but there are some things that that I think actually no, that should be a boundary. And then there's other things I've reflected on and gone, right, I think this is me. This is my trigger and it's not fair on my partner. So it's something that I need to deal with. So, there might be sort of triggers like rejection, for example. I can easily feel rejected sometimes if, I don't know, Luke doesn't want to watch a film with me, right? And he moans about it. Because to me, I'm thinking, well, we've not really spent much time together this week. And already he's just instantly saying no to watching a film with me. Whereas if we were dating, he'd absolutely watch a film with me, treat me better. So that's something that has come up before. In fact, it only came up a few days ago. And I found myself getting really sort of kind of like frustrated because I know that it's like a bit of a trigger, that sort of rejection and feeling like he's not really making much of an effort. And, normally what would happen is if I don't want to deal with that thorn, I would just, have a bit of an argument with him. But it never made me feel better doing that. So I had to leave the room and tell him, like, I need to leave the room. And essentially what I was trying to do is just to sit with that emotion and that feeling and just try to let it go and not to try and and not to let it ruin my day because I'd had a good day and I don't want that one thing to ruin it. So once I calmed down a little bit, I came back in and then we did end up having a discussion about it in like a calmer way. He explained his point of view, I explained mine. And because we kind of went about it like that, I felt so much better and then I did get closure. So if that was to happen again, hopefully I wouldn't sort of feel that emotion. But if I did, I know that I can either leave the room to manage it, or if I feel like I can let it go there and then and just have a calm conversation, then that could help that situation. So that's just another example really of what I'm working on. And like I said, it's not that you're going to be able to remove your inner thorns the second you practice it. Some really will need a lot more practice. So everything that I've sort of learned about emotional triggers and things that I've found to have worked for me or working for me has been in this book. So I cannot sort of praise it enough. And if you are interested in buying it, then I'll put a link in the sort of description of this episode so you can find it. But it's absolutely amazing. So if you think it's something that you're interested in, then absolutely buy it. So what I thought I'd do at the end of this episode is just give you some useful steps to help you manage and release your emotional triggers. I've kind of taken inspiration from the book, but I'm also someone who just likes to sort of organise things in my own way. So these are some of the steps that help me sort of overcome my emotional triggers. So first of all, you need to actually have that self-awareness. So writing down your triggers. And it might be that you have to sit there for half an hour to write down as many triggers that you can think of. It could be those small triggers that when you're going outside, someone cuts you up, something like that. Or it could be more of those deeper emotional triggers that you get in relationships. Whatever is a trigger for you, you need to write it down, just so that you are aware of it. And then the next step, what I would do is just to write down why you think you might have them. What is it that triggers you about that? So just to give another quick example, if I'm walking past someone who's smoking a cigarette, okay, it really does choke me up and I don't like it. And I get frustrated. and I know why I get frustrated, is because I don't want to have to inhale that and damage my body because they're choosing to do that to themselves. So that's something that I'm still working on because it can really sort of upset me and stress me out when I'm walking past so many people that are just smoking. So that's just like another trigger. But just thinking about why it is a trigger is helpful because then you can sort of try to tackle it a little bit better. And then the next step is to decide whether you actually want to keep those emotional triggers or remove them. And I know that sounds almost sort of patronizing because it just makes sense to remove them. But if you don't feel ready, you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you make that decision. You might have a couple of emotional triggers that you would like to work on first, okay, prioritizing them, and that's absolutely fine, okay? Do what works for you. Um, so if you are choosing to remove those emotional triggers or some of those emotional triggers, then what I would do is just take it one at a time, um, and just feel that uncomfortable emotion rise within you, okay, when that moment happens or if you're thinking about it. And try your best just to watch that emotion as though that emotion is a separate entity of you, okay? And if you can do that, then you can just sort of watch it, relax into it, and you'll notice because you're being so present, that emotion will start to sort of dissipate a little bit, and hopefully go completely to the point where you're just feeling really calm and relaxed. Um, and that is essentially the trick to overcoming and managing your emotional triggers. And you might have to do this several times, and that's absolutely fine, okay? It's just like when you want to forgive someone and you really do feel like you forgive them, but then another moment happens and you feel like you're still holding on. It just takes a few times to sort of overcome it more. So don't be hard on yourself, be patient with yourself. But I would just follow those steps and then just see how you feel, and see the progress that you're making. So, I really hope that this has been a useful episode for you. And obviously, like I've said, this book I find is absolutely incredible. And it really is helping me. And I say it is helping me because I still will dip into it and it does give me that wisdom and that knowledge and encouragement to make those improvements. So, thank you so much for listening. And please stay true to you. And hopefully, I'll see you soon.